talking about how motherhood is a calling that you can have without having children. And I mean that by, you know these things, but it's the difference between the Lord not giving me children as a mother and choosing not to have them because I don't think that they're valued. So whenever you talk about these things, like if you talk about abortion, it's always going to be sensitive. You still got to talk about it. I recently did speak about the issue, and I just knew there was a woman in the back, and she was fidgeting and, left. So you could sense it. Likewise with motherhood, you can talk about the joy that a lot of younger people are finding in big families. And anything where you say that there's going to be something very good, then people take it as, and I don't mean people, I mean we take it as an indictment, or people bristle, or they say, well, who says you have to have that many? That's not the way we talk about things. I will say, like, we had 3 children, but it was so I was born in 66, but my brothers each had 2, and there wasn't anything like a great decision made there, but it was just kind of the way you did it. So I think the question was asked the other day, like, the soccer moms, how many kids are they having? My guess is what I've seen is they're not having 1 kid anymore because it just gets too lonely. So in an earthly way, they figured that out. And I think a lot of them had landed on 3 as kind of a decision, which is better than 1 and none for sure. But I look at me and my brothers, my sister had 1. It was just kind of the way we thought about things, because we were thinking about, there's college and there are other earthly things that kind of take over your mind, and you just don't see things. Maybe you're not used to it. So there has been an adjustment in my own thinking. When I first started, like I told you, I was from a kid, I was very much interested in the pro-life stuff because I read Who Wrote the Baby. It wasn't until I was a professor, really, that the students were very keen on birth control being a problem. And I kind of agreed, but it wasn't a passion of mine. And then theology of the body and reading about it, and there's problematic things such as, and one of the hard things to really get was that with birth control, if you were taking the pill, that's an abortifacient. So it's like, I don't even want to think about it. Like, who could be complicit in that, but everybody was doing it and just didn't think about it. We weren't told about it really, but we weren't investigating, but it's just what everybody did. So then you would hear younger people, if you're on to something, a convert's always going to be a little bit of a fanatic. So a younger person is always going to be, who comes onto the truth, is always going to be stronger. And in a pastor's group, for instance, that's why you always need new blood. You always need the younger guys to shake things up a little bit. They're not always right, but they'll see things maybe that you didn't see. And likewise, you always need older pastors because they're the ones that can say, it'll be all right. I told you about the flag thing. I was adamant the flag ought not be there. And I'm not saying I made a peace with it, but I learned to put it into perspective. Like, I didn't want, sometimes I think my own prejudice against it, and I'm still against it, but I was reading into the people's minds what was not there. Because I was saying, you'd have this talk like you'd having the Roman eagle above the altar. And I kind of agree with that, but I don't think the people were thinking that. I think they were thinking in terms of piety. It's good to love God. It's good to love your family. It's good to love your nation and to be thankful for it. And all those things are true. So yeah, when it came to birth control, well, I had a lot to learn. And when I did, remember this pro-life paper, I had to, when I read about Margaret Sanger, her life began not with abortion, but with birth control. And it is remarkable because reading Margaret Sanger helped me see that the issues that we're fighting against, again, we're fighting in a war, not a series of battles. Now, maybe you can fight in one battle or the other and you're helping the cause of the war. But we can't be naive and think that the enemy is fighting a series of battles. They're fighting a war. And it's a war against humanity. So again, if Satan can't kill the baby, what if we just don't have babies? And what if we don't have children? And this was getting what Pastor said yesterday, Peter said about the fact that we're having more people dying than being born in our nation. And it's in our own churches, of course, become reflections of that. And I said, I think as I near 60, I am the average age, roughly speaking, of Lutheran pastor. Like I'm in the middle of that. But I mean, when I was a kid, I thought, 60 is old. And 60 kind of still is old. But again, thanks to a lot of changes, when my grandma died at the age of 65, something like that, she was an old woman. I mean, she was an old woman at 65. And my mom is sitting here at 95. And I think it took my parents a little bit by surprise. Because I think my grandfather died when I was like 2 years old. So the younger deaths, I use a CPAP machine. And then I saw a really healthy young guy. And probably lifestyle change could help that a little bit. But then I saw a younger guy who was like really fit and he had a CPAP machine. It was kind of funny. It's like a club. But then I thought, like, how many people just died of heart attacks because they didn't have a CPAP machine and they were snoring. And everybody thought, oh, snoring, no big deal. Well, kind of is a big deal. So a lot of folks are living much longer and quite healthy and doing great things. Now, that is a great blessing, but maybe it's also put us to sleep a little bit about we've had this long period of time now where the church still does have, even though it's shrinking, there's still a lot of faithful among us. Now, I don't know, I'm not reading the demographics enough to know when the thing just completely collapses, but it's already collapsed. So yeah, as far as the war goes on, it's reading about Margaret Sanger. She didn't just say that she wanted birth control, and abortion, of course, came later as kind of a big thing. I mean, there's always been abortion. When in the early church, it was, I mean, when Christianity changed the Greco-Roman, changed the world, because children were largely considered among the pagans as property, and they were disposable. So in the ancient world, there was pharmakeia, which was abortion. So there were drugs. And then somebody mentioned about feminism. There's always been a close relationship between feminism and witchcraft. And that's true. But with witchcraft comes the potions. And the potions included the killing of the unborn. And if you didn't kill them, you expose them. You just leave the kid out in the field and not think about it. And it was the Christians who started finding those kids in the field and raising them. I mean, they changed the whole way we look about children, and also the whole way we look about women. I mean, it was revolutionary the way Christians thought of women. And as somebody just said to me, like, among the pagans, you can't find any place where the philosophers say, love your wives. You might treat them with respect, but actually love your wives. And even lay down your life for your wives. And I suppose even the philosophers would say that the wife belongs to the husband. So, and St. Paul says that the wife belongs to the husband. And he'll even say the woman was made for man, not man for women. So, well, you can go too far in that, I suppose. But it's St. Paul who says that the woman belongs to the man, and then adds, the man belongs to the woman. So it was a revolutionary way of thinking about children and about women. We mentioned yesterday the women that were part of our Lord's ministry. They were always there. People like Joanna, people like Mary Magdalene, the women who helped with the burial, the women who were instrumental in forming house churches. I do think Mark's mother, I think Mark, the evangelist, probably from what I can tell, his father must have died early. And I think he was a mama's boy. And he was a mama's boy because I think he's the rich young ruler who said, will you follow me? And he goes, and I love the young guy. He's not a bad guy. He says, do you know the do you know the commandments? And he knows the commandments. Like he's gone through catechism. And I like the last commandment is he changes the order of the commandments. Our Lord does. And the last one he puts is honor your father and mother, which I think to Mark is, I think you need to go back to home to mom, kid. Because the one thing he couldn't do was to give up his possessions. I don't think he's a bad guy, though. Because our Lord says to him, and our Lord didn't say to him, in the Gospel of Mark, it says, Jesus looked at him and loved him. I think Mark came after the Gospel of John, and Mark is putting himself in the position of a beloved disciple. Who else would know that Jesus looked at him and loved him, like across the crowded room, that it had to be Mark, or it had to be the rich young man. And then I think it's for that reason that you have the young man who flees naked in the Gospel of Mark. My guess is when they had the Lord's Supper, he goes to a certain place and prepare the room. I bet that's Mark's house. And they were disciples. And there need to be wealthy people. So blessing of the poor, mammon becomes a problem, but it also is a blessing that can be used for the sake of others and for the sake of the church. So those who have money are necessary, or unnecessary, that can be put to good use. A church like this doesn't get built. I don't know who the private donor is who helped fund this, but you need to have people willing to pony up a little money to make something happen, to build a church. We at the seminary, we could not exist except for the generosity of people who have extra cash. I don't know what our annual budget is, but I guess it's like $12 or $13 million a year. And what's that?
So for us, actually, I just heard you talk about this a couple of weeks ago. And he said the annual budget is $18 million. And 2/3 of that, $12 million a year, is from small individual donors and gifts.
Yeah. So we're more like Bernie Sanders, you're saying?
The Fort Wayne Seminary is is number 2 on the list of how much of their budget comes from small donor gifts. That's pretty in the country.
That's pretty amazing. So I mean, I think it's good to have Russ say that, because from our point of view, then, and I think every pastor feels this way too in their congregation, you can't help but have gratitude. Because nothing happens up here without you people here. It's like we are in this together. And a church can't run that. I also think, like, when you look at the story of Zebedee, and Zebedee has two sons, James and John, who are in the fishing business. It's a business. They're not like two guys going out there, hey, I brought home fish for dinner. No, it's a business. And they're making money. And it says when James and John left, they left Zebedee with the hired hands, which means it's an enterprise. And now also I think we may think about the ministry. There are hymns that give the impression, at least, that and I understand. The thing is, we're all called. Some of us are called into the ministry to preach, and that's one calling. There is another calling of baptism, though, and you're all called to be sons and daughters of the King. You're all called in the kingdom, and wherever you are in life, then you say, "What can I do to continue the work of the church?" And you look at a person like Zebedee. He was not called into the ministry. This is why, like, Matthew 28 really has to do with sending out of the 11. It's not a sending out of everybody. It is a sending for the whole church. But if you're a lay person, you are not called to teach all things whatsoever I've commanded you. One of you said, like, there should be just before this said, well, there should be a version of this for kids or something, which is right. Yeah. Now, I'm not telling you any stuff here today, and I'm not telling the seminary students, and you're free to come to the seminary anytime you want and sit in on a class. I might, if I see you, I might change my lecture a little bit, because I tell the seminary students I will speak sometimes more harshly to them or more directly to them, because I know there's just a little bit of time we got. You have 3 years to go out, and a seminary student cannot leave and go into the ministry still not sure about certain things. They have to be sure about what they believe, and they have to know what they believe. That same burden does not go to everybody. You just learn as you learn, and it's great, and you enjoy it. And then you're disciples of the Lord. Now you look, but the ministry of Jesus could not have taken place without Zebedee. And you do see Zebedee's name mentioned throughout, like the mother of the sons of Zebedee was there at the cross. Why is Zebedee's mentioned? Because it's a way of, hey, thanks, Zebedee, because I believe he helped fund the ministry. His sons went off to the seminary of Jesus, and they blessed it. And Zebedee gave of his goods. And I think Mark was that kind of a guy. I think his mother was wealthy. And I do think he was a mama's boy, because when he was good, I think he's the kid who would, and I feel a little bit of maybe, I don't know, close to Mark in a certain way, because I picture myself as Mark in a way, because he was a young guy. And I think he probably would have been there at the Lord's Supper, kind of like helping in the corner. And I don't know if you are pastors, or sometimes I can spot a guy who should be at the seminary because they just are hungry for the things. But they're the guys who just always want they're like theology junkies. There was a guy who was older. He's a Minnesota pastor, and he would come to every Lutheran confessional thing. Like every conference he was there. And he tells me the story. And then they're at the bar or whatever it is. It's the nighttime Gemütlichkeit. And my mom looks at him like, what are you waiting for? You know you want to go to the seminary. And it was my mom who got him to say, oh, okay. And he's been a pastor ever since, I think with Mark, the one thing he didn't want to give up was all his possessions. But I don't think he's just like a lover of money. He was just immature. Like, oh, I don't know what kids like to, but I don't want to give up my Xbox. I don't want to give up my whatever it is, these little comforts. And I also think in the book of Acts that you have that first missionary journey, and Peter and Barnabas are going out, and Mark goes with him, and then somehow he's not with them. And I think I always joke with Leanna. I was like, "What hotel am I staying at?" And I'm like, "Best Western." Is that really the one that I should be staying at? The Best Western is great, by the way. It's great. But I kind of joke about that. It's like Super 8, 1 star, really. And St. Paul would stay at the 4 star and the 1 star. He had wealthy friends. So when he was with the wealthy friends, he enjoyed it. And there were other times there were just hardships and he had nothing. And our Lord was like that. I mean, he had wealthy friends. He ate at the houses of really people who were doing well. And then he could also say, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head, because there are other times he had nothing. So when you go in the ministry, you do take a kind of leap of faith. And the leap of faith is, nothing, well, nothing's guaranteed in life. So you got to think of it like that. But we saw in Matthew 10 that when he sent out his disciples, he said, don't take anything with you. Don't take extra clothes, or don't take a money bag with you. When you go to a house, they'll receive you and you stay at that house. Now, there are a couple things there. One is he wanted you to stay at that house because he doesn't want you looking for another house. So you stay at the middle class house or the lower middle class house, which has a comfortable bed. And then all of a sudden, this happens all the time, the wealthier person says, oh, why don't you just stay with us? And you're like, oh, that'll be better. Well, it's an insult to the person who invited you over there. So the other thing about the ministry is that there is a temptation to use whatever authority you have or think you have in order to fleece the flock. So you look at the people that Jesus is dealing with, they love to walk around in their robes. They love the greetings in the marketplace. They love the best seats always. And, so the ministry can be used in that way, where I always think there should be I have a cousin who he's an actor. He was in Nurse Jackie, and he was in Rambo 3, and he was in 24. That was the best. He even got a great death scene in 24. My kids were so excited when they met him. They're like, you got the death scene, because nobody got a death scene. And the other show he got in was The Sopranos. And in The Sopranos, he played the Italian family. He played the priest, the young priest, and he was great, slimy. And he'd go over to the Sopranos house. He'd always go around 6 o'clock, when in Mrs. Soprano, there's a wealthy home and they're cooking a really nice meal. And he'd go there. Oh, Mrs. Soprano, smells like you're cooking something really good tonight. And she's on to him, whatever. She's like, yes, Father, you can come and have dinner with us. And then he would go over to the wine rack and he'd start favoring the bottles. Oh, this looks like an interesting vintage. I've heard this is a really fine bottle of wine. Yes, Father, you know where the corkscrew is. You can have it open up the wine. And he was always the guy, at the funeral, he was always the guy who was right next to the wealthy widow. You could just see his hand in her purse. So it can be used in a slimy way. Like Simon in the book of Acts, Simony, he wanted to use it for his own personal. But to the disciples, he says, you go there, wherever you go, and you eat what's presented to you. Like I say, you cannot be a pastor and be a picky eater. And really, Christians cannot be picky eaters. When you go to a place, and we got to teach our kids that. When you go to a place, you take what you are given with gratitude. and you eat what's set before you. And like, it doesn't have to be your whole, if you have a whole different diet, you can enjoy that at home. But when you go to somebody's house, you honor them and you give thanks for what they give you. So you go there, and now part of it though is you're dependent upon the people. So when you go out, you're dependent upon the people. There was another young man, he wanted to come to the seminary, but he was concerned that he wouldn't be able to take, if he went to the ministry, he wouldn't be able to take care of his wife and kids. And I said to him, well, do you have a wife and kids? No, but if I do, I'm like, okay. And he goes, but I would like to become a chaplain, not a pastor. But could I just go into the chaplaincy and then I'd have a good career and a good pension? And chaplaincy is great. But he was so concerned about the security that would be given to him. And like, how could I go into the ministry? Because I don't know what would happen. And then I just said, well, look, we're at the cafeteria. I said, look around you. Look at all these guys here. And the guys are smart and they're very capable. I mean, the seminarians are just amazing young men. So not all young, but they're amazing men. And I said, look around you. And they were all laughing. They were having a great time. They didn't look like they were in any way deprived. They were in no way fearful of the future. Because they had faith that the Lord would take care of them, like Matthew 5, the birds of the air. The Lord's going to take care of you. But it's also wonderful the way the Lord does take care of pastors. There is a mutual relationship that we have. That the pastors in a good situation are going to be dependent upon the people. And that already happens at the seminary. So now I had it pretty easy. So my father was a professor, so I got to go for free. So who am I to say, right? And I lived at home. I went to college. I lived in a dorm for 4 years at Indiana University, and I loved it. And then moving back home, what in the world? Well, I mean, it was odd. But then living in the dorm is they seem to like it, but dorm life's not so great. And, but they seem happy. And then I'm amazed, like, we'll get guys like who are lawyers, maybe. We have some guys, maybe the wife can't come for a year. They live in the dorm at the age of like 65. We'll get some Lutheran hospital people. Come to the Lutheran hospital. That's just, you can have this sort of thing, except instead of having me, you'll have 10 professors over 3 days or something like that. And it's great. And I see some older folks well into their 70s. And I'm like, where are you staying? So I'm laughing about me going to the Best Western, like, oh, is that enough for me? I'm just joking. But they're like, oh, we're staying at the dorm. I'm like, really? And they're like, oh, it's fine. And that attitude is just fantastic. I love to see it because it's like, it's okay. It's enough. But the mutual dependency that we have is great because the pastors are dependent upon the people, but the people are also then given the gift of being able to participate. Like it would be if pastors were, and it can happen, a pastor goes in and he's already independently wealthy. We do have people who come after a military career or something. They've already got the pension. They've already had the big home and they're kind of set already. I have friends my age who have been retired already for a number of years because they already got the pensions. Okay. So that can happen. And that gives a pastor, I suppose, a certain freedom. But on the other hand, the give and take is a healthy thing in a relationship. And the people need the opportunity when you think about the woman who comes up to Jesus, they're at the meal and she washes Jesus' feet with her hair, which is like, you think about that, that's incredible. You think a beautiful woman, long hair, and then her hair is wet and she's washing the feet, and people are like, what's going on here? but so much that she loves the Lord that the glory of the woman, the hair, is used on the lowest part of Jesus, the feet, in a way of showing love for Jesus. I mean, it's amazing faith and love there. And she's using, ointments that cost money. And then you see St. Paul, and he says something remarkable. He says, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring you the good news. And that can be humbling because a pastor in no way, we have feet of clay, is in no way, any way deserving. And we know that um, the people in the pews often have greater faith than we do. And so just because your pastor is the leader doesn't mean he has the greatest faith. He's preaching to himself too, to fortify himself, because he knows we're all in this together as poor, miserable sinners. But how beautiful are the feet of those who bring you the good news. That's why I say, if you have a faithful pastor, you have something worth more than gold, something that the world does not have. Now, this relationship that we have, it's a very healthy thing to have a give and take. In Matthew 10, it says, you have been freely given, therefore freely give. So it's like I and whatever these pastors here are going to preach to you the good news, whether they get anything or not. That's what we're called to do. And we're not called to really serve you. We are, but we're all called to serve the Lord. We serve you because we love the Lord. Now, that kind of thing also is good to remember when our earthly relationships. Because again, we all have difficulties with those whom we love or those who are closest to us. And sometimes people are very unlovable. We're very unlovable. So when you're looking at the situation, like, can I love that person? I'm just kind of resentful and angry. Well, you're saying, I love that person because I love the Lord. And the Lord is lovable. And I can love that person because I know the Lord loves that person and he's given that person to me in my life. And it kind of frees you up. When you look at a bad situation, the bad situation is that, like, again, I think I mentioned this yesterday. It's like, if you don't like somebody, you don't want anything from them. Like, no, thank you. Because if they give you something, then you're beholden to them and you're tied to them in a way. So, like, beware of gifts, because gifts always come with a string attached. And a lot of people don't want the salvation because of that. They don't want anything from the Lord. They don't want salvation from the Lord because, oh no, that means I have a relationship with the Lord. And they don't want that relationship. So they'd rather just push the Lord away. At the seminary, our students already when I talk to seminarians, they're not laymen. I had a professor who left. He just passed away. Good man. But he used to say, like, he was leaving the faculty to go back in the parish. And so he said, well, what is it going to be like teaching laymen all the time? And he says, well, I've been teaching laymen all the time here because I've been teaching at the seminary. They're not pastors. And he was right and he was wrong, because when a man is called to the seminary or called to the Lord, there is a process. So a person who first comes to the seminary is not ordained, but he's also not a layman anymore in a way. He already needs to be thinking about himself as a pastor. So there's a process. Again, that's why I like boy acolytes, then that's way further back in the process. But when he comes in, he has to acclimate himself to his new role. And that will happen gradually. And he will help do the readings. He will help serve at the altar. He might do Bible studies for the youth, that sort of thing, because you need to get yourself thinking about that role. And I found myself, as the further I went on in the process, I changed the way I dressed. I went there in a more professional way. because I had to start thinking to myself, hey, I'm not just in college anymore. I got to get myself used to thinking about myself as a pastor. But they already experienced the generosity of the church at the seminary, both because of the gifts that are given, the monetary gifts. They make a huge difference. I mean, and this is an ongoing thing. But like we're all ongoing. We're all making money every year. We have stocks, we have jobs, whatever it is. But also in the necessities of life. And I think that kind of, at least that makes it more vivid. When I was when I was first a pastor, I recognized I had a new family because when I went there, I think there were like 3 women there, and they all brought homemade soup. It was just great because I was like each one of those women. I was probably their, I went to graduate school after, but I might be 30 years old. I don't know, so a little younger than that. But when I went there, it's like all of a sudden I had all these grandmas, and they were taking care of me, and it was really nice. And so they brought the soup to me, and sometimes they bring over food for the family, and they were just wonderful little gifts that they very encouraging. And they could just look at me. I'm kind of a sloppy person. It's not a great thing. But I would have my robe, and I remember, like as a vicar, a woman coming over, and she started to disrobe me, like after the service. Vicar, she's like, shh. And I'm like, what's going on? And the pastor's laughing at me because Vicar let her do it because she was taking the robe and she was going to go launder it so I could look nice for the next service. And it was like, that's what a mom would do. And it was just so sweet. And it was sweet because she cared for me, because she cared for the gospel. And we don't have Jesus walking among us like he was. So people show their love for the pastors of their congregation in the same way. So our Lord says, whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. And if you reject a faithful pastor, you're kind of screwed because you're rejecting Jesus. And you can't say, well, I just don't like him. It's like, okay, we have family members we don't like. And some of us have personalities that don't mesh. It's just the way it is in life. Like I had a guy in my congregation. He really loved me, and he was just great. And then I heard that he really hated the pastor before me. And I think the pastor before me was a good guy. And then I heard he didn't really like the pastor after me. But to his credit, he always went to church, and pastors that he liked and pastors that he didn't. So, some people might. So the point is, that's the virtue necessary there is charity. You take a person for what they are, and you can learn to love them. And so the way it comes out in a material way at the seminary, which I just think is beautiful, is that at the seminary there's a food and clothing bank. And I never dressed better than my 4th year because people would have all these nice suits that they would donate. And at the food bank, I mean, our cupboards were stacked with food. I had a bunch left over for graduate school. But we took all these cans and all this good stuff. We even got government pork. I love government pork. I didn't know. We had this bean soup. It was just fantastic. But all this stuff was made possible by generous people so that the food budget of the seminarians was, like they say, 80% covered because of the donations of the people. Now, there is a special place in hell for those who are chintzy, because there's the woman who she loves to go shopping, but she's got no kids or nobody to buy for. So what she would do is every month she went shopping, and she would look for the best deals on really good things. Like she would look for a nice suit jacket, nice pants, nice kids outfits, toddler stuff. She went and then she brought it to the food bank because she knew where it was going and she could scratch her shopping itch, which she loved to do. But she gave it to the seminary. It's like, wow, that's really just humbling. And then there were people who would bring clothes that had stains on them, or had a rip in them, and they knew it because, oh, that's good enough for them. And it's like, those people should just fry in hell. I mean, what a terrible thing to do that you're going to give us your rags. So you can give them to those people because you don't need them anymore. There's something wrong with that. Now, that's not 99% of the people aren't like that. And so the seminary, when you look at what I like about the food and clothing bank, it just makes it so material or obvious the love of the church for those who will be pastors. And it's humbling. And of course, there's monetary gifts, but it's because we're in this together. Now, Mark had probably the difficulty of the fact that his mom probably was wealthy and he probably was a little soft. And the first missionary journey, he's like, oh, this will be great. Where are we staying tonight? Well, it's going to be, what would be a bad place to stay tonight? And there's so many nice places to stay. But it's like, we're staying there? Like, this is not for me. And so he left the group. And then he grew up a little bit. And when he grew up a little bit, he sees Paul and Barnabas. He says, I'd like to try it again. And Paul says, forget it. No, I'm not taking you anywhere anymore. You already blew it, kid. And Barnabas, who has the spirit of encouragement, said, hey, Paul, there's a dispute. And Barnabas, he's such a great guy. Paul's a great man. He says, no, Paul, I'm taking it. And at that time, Paul and Barnabas split apart. And Paul took Silas, and Barnabas, who had the spirit of encouragement, took Mark. And look what happened because of Mark. He became an evangelist. He became very useful in the ministry of both Peter and Paul. So he became a great man of the church. He just needed a little growing up. I kind of wonder whether that kid who wanted to go to the chaplaincy because he wanted the money, I kind of wonder whether he's going to come back. Because, our Lord's not going to say, oh, please come now. He's not going to go begging for him to come. But I kind of wonder whether that guy will come back. And so anyway, back to Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger, when there was a whole lot more going on with her with the birth control that ended up in abortion. Her father was a Marxist, a communist, and she hated him. But as so often happens in these kind of relationships, when you hate a father like that, you actually end up becoming like the father that you hate. So it's kind of a counseling difficulty. She hated him, but she really ended up becoming quite a bit like him. And she got married, but she saw marriage as a kind of trap. And, we're watching this play out now. I'm amazed at how many people end up getting divorced after 40 years now because they're taught that marriage is a trap. And like, oh, if I could be free. But then again, what Satan calls freedom, he sells freedom, but gives you isolation. Because it's like, well, you think about the prodigal son. Hey, I'll be free from the house of my father. I'll be free from that older brother I don't like very much. I'll be free. And he ends up all alone by himself. He isolates himself and Satan wins. But he comes back, though. Well, Margaret Sanger, she never came back. But the way she talked about marriage that was the big eye-opening thing to me. Talking about how Satan sees this as all one thing. We have the great hymn, Blessed Be the Tie That Binds. And I didn't used to like it as much, but now I love it. And Blessed Be the Tie That Binds was a hymn written by a pastor in England who was leaving his congregation. And he and his wife were going to someplace else. And as they were leaving, they started breaking down in tears and they came back because they couldn't bear to leave the people. And then he wrote, Blessed be the ties that bind our hearts in Christian love. And, that's what the church offers, are ties that bind. So again, in the Missouri Synod, I see certain people over and over again. I can't help it because we are part of a family here in this church. And wherever I go to a place for 2 or 3 days, I just feel so at home because I just know that we have this family in common. And I'll say I feel the same thing if I go to Tanzania, even though the culture is different, the language is different. I know when I go to a place that's foreign, I know that we're family. And it's a remarkable thing that we have this fellowship. But Margaret Sanger, she couldn't, and then as her years went on, she just became worse, But she looked, it wasn't just that she saw, we live in a day where women don't want to be women and men don't want to be men. It's terrible. Men don't want the responsibility of the sacrifice for their wives and for their families. So, why would I want to be the head of the household? That means I've got to work and maybe get a double shift, and I've got to really be a responsible person, and it's all going to be on me. I don't want that. And women are taught that motherhood itself is a burden and that it's somehow like having chains. I want to be free. Children obligate us. Like, if you have children, you are not free. And I thought about that too. Like, oh, won't it be great when the children are grown up? But like, oh, if you have 2 or 3, then you can imagine a day when you don't have them and I can do whatever I want. Well, I kind of get it, but it's also a lie. Because the ties that bind us are actually the things that make life worth living. So our Lord did not create us for isolation. He created Eve for Adam. And from that union, which is marriage, we have children and we have grandchildren, if God should grant them. And then this wonderful way, we have cousins and aunts and uncles. It's a whole great network. And a child is the greatest blessed, not because their mom or dad has money, but because you have a dad at home. And God willing, you have, this is why you marry a Christian spouse, though. Hopefully a confessional Lutheran one, so that you can be bound together in the baptism of the child, in the raising of a child, with grandparents on both sides as kind of a safety net. Hey, I got some problems, Dad. Well, there's a good chance he'll have a little extra money, or he'll have a little extra wisdom, and he'll be able to help you. So it's fantastic. But Margaret Sanger, she thought that marriage was in fact a form of slavery or servitude. And it's amazing when you look at it, because I mentioned to you about what Satan wants. Well, how do you know what Satan wants? Well, of course we do. And Margaret Sanger knew. When you look at her, I don't know if I can find my abortion article, but it's amazing when she writes about the church. She writes it in terms of Eden. So we got an Eden, about paradise. She focuses Satan as the good figure, the one who will free us from a God who doesn't want us to be joyful. And she thought that we were in bondage to God, and she said in bondage to priests. We could say pastors, ministers, because they don't want us to have the joy, the pleasures, the joy that we want. So God is keeping stuff from us. And that's the lie. Like, if you go into the sin, if you rebel against God, you'll be free from God. when actually you'll just be all alone, you'll be bitter, and you'll become contorted in your soul. So when she said the worst institution on earth was that of marriage, like she said, that's the worst thing that the world has created is marriage, because marriage left women in bondage. They were not free to be who they wanted to be. And I mean, it's really quite remarkable the way she wrote. After she's quite a woman, her kids do not speak well of her. She did have kids at the beginning, but they don't speak well of her. And her husband was kind of a milquetoast guy who went along with whatever she said, probably to keep her. But she would have him do all the dirty work about handing out the literature and things like that. And he ended up becoming arrested for doing her job. And he didn't really care about it, but you got to make the wife happy. So he did it, and he was put in jail. So when he was put in jail, what did she do? She went to England. And she met all of these other people. She met eugenicists, and she met people who talked about free love. Like before the 60s, free love, that was already in the air in the last century, in the 1800s, among the elite. And so all talk about free sex, which you know from like the 60s flower children, that was in play 100 years before that. And it just took a while to germinate, the seeds to germinate, and then to take over. So she went to England and she met a person named Havelock Ellis, who was, he taught her that sex, and she talks about sex was the path to paradise, that our eyes will be opened and that we'll be able to pursue. And I do like Meatloaf. We don't know if there's anybody old or young enough to remember Meatloaf, but there was a great song, Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Great, terrible song, a great song, but it's a great song because the guy is talking to the girl and he's like, oh, come, let me sleep on in, baby, baby, let me sleep on in. And he wanted Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Like, tonight will be heaven. There was a lot of songs like that in the 70s. Like, tonight will last forever. Tonight is eternity. And of course it isn't. The morning always comes. And the song, he finally gets what he wants, and the ending is great. So he goes, I'll love you to the end of time. And of course he's lying. And then at the end he goes, now I'm praying for the end of time to hurry up and arrive. Because if I spend another minute with you, I don't think I will ever survive. There's wisdom in the song, but for her, it really was the act of sex itself, apart from procreation. That's when there's this disorder. Sex apart from procreation, sex apart from a committed relationship, offers to young people an exhilaration, but it ends in misery and loneliness. So you just offer all these sad creatures. And now, and the Margaret Sanger story, as far as it's really remarkable, is that so when she came back to America, she was a communist. Her father was a communist and she was a communist. So like her newsletter has, a woman with a raised fist, like no more servitude. She's going to fight the system. And then Havelock Ellis says to her, you're not going to win the day by pushing communism because people don't want it. And this gets us to going back to critical theory about what Marx was trying to do. Is Marx tried to set the workers against the owners, the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. He tried to create resentment. And if you look at the secular left, it's built on resentment covetousness, envy, bitterness. So again, and that's like the most corrosive thing to the soul. Because what else could, besides envy and bitterness, what else could make you eat? You're eating a really nice hamburger. Like we went to the restaurant on Monday. I think 3 people ordered Build-A-Burger. So we're not very sophisticated. But they ordered their Build-A-Burger and it was a good burger. And you're like, who could not be content with that? It's like, that's a great meal. And you can think of the simple meals you eat at home and they're great. But then all of a sudden, somebody else is eating something better. And all of a sudden, your burger starts to taste bitter to you because somebody else has more to you than you. That's what envy does to a person. It eats them up and they don't see what they have right here, like the blessings that they have in their hand. It's great, but they can't see it. And Marxism is built on that. It's built on envy. And but Marx was not initially successful in the way that he thought he would be. He thought he would get the workers of the world to unite. And he was thinking, factory workers who had a decent life, over and against the owners of the factories or who controlled the means of production. Strangely enough, Marxism did not take hold in places like Germany or in places like America, even though, again, Marxism has been around in America for a long time. Like, we can't just pretend that, we could have gone that way. McCarthy was not all that far off because there were many in America. You think about the Russian Revolution. You don't think that the Russian Revolution couldn't have also succeeded or might succeed today in America, because resentment and envy are always there. When you see all the young people in the street, that's what they're doing. So, but it didn't succeed first in, places that Marx thought it would succeed. It succeeded in Russia, which was not a capitalist economy, and there were owners, there were serfs, but you had an initial wave of success, but it wasn't succeeding in places like the United States and Germany, because the people still had enough common sense, and go back to the common sense of they could look at their lives and they could say, but wait, we have actually a pretty good thing. Like, you look at your life and you say, hey, I've got a job. I'm not rich, but I'm doing okay. And I got a family and it's pretty good. So what do I need to have this Marxist revolution? So it was a guy. So who brought it around? Oh yeah, I should just say about Margaret Sanger again, is that, so she was a communist, but then she toned it down. She says, there's a Beatles song, Revolution. If you go sharing pictures of Chairman Mao, you ain't gonna get anywhere with anyone anyhow. Like, you just can't say, look, Mao. It's like, people didn't want that. You need to think of a different way of approaching it. And Margaret Sanger did think of a different way of approaching it. And that's when she changed her tactics. And it's just fascinating, because when you look at the abortion movement, or the birth control movement, she began as a radical, a communist, and she changed her tactics. It's always divide and conquer. She changed her tactics and she divided the Protestants from the Catholics. So she went right to the Protestants and she said, you don't need to follow the Pope. The Pope has all these rules. And she would use the American Declaration of Independence against them. saying, look, you're free from the king, so also you're free from the Pope. You can do what you want. And you're like, yeah, we're not. And that kind of strain still happens today. So you will still have Lutherans who will look at a crucifix and say, why are you bringing something Catholic into our church? It's like, I'm sorry, it's not Catholic. It's just Christian. And the fact that we got rid of it has nothing to do with what real Lutheranism is. Lutherans always had crucifixes because Christians have always had crucifixes. So people think like, if a young pastor comes in, like, what is he bringing all this Catholic stuff? It isn't. It's just Lutheranism. But the Protestants were very susceptible to anti-Catholicism. And also, what they used was a kind of dislike for Eastern European, for Southern Europeans, or look at those Italians having so many kids, or Northern, look at those Irish people having so many kids. That isn't right. So the Protestants bought into the idea first of birth control. And if you look at the history of it all, it's so interesting because really, birth control and then abortion was really a Republican thing. When Margaret Sanger, though, she went international, the two leading honorary chair, talking about just, and again, this is not to say, oh, evil men, but it's worth thinking that the two honorary chairmen for her movement, Planned Parenthood International, were Harry S. Truman, a man I hold in great regard, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, a man I hold in great regard. Both in many ways great men that I'm not worthy to tie their shoes. But nevertheless, they were part of an age. And they bought into this thing that, too many children are a problem. Children are not a blessing. If we wish to be popular, if we wish to be prosperous, then we can't be so populous. We can't have so many people. Yeah.
Very quickly, because I know you got the time crunch. I'm so glad you brought that up in your article and again verbally about Truman and Ike, because it's so ironic that that's what brought them together, because they did not like each other. Truman wanted Eisenhower to run as a Democrat. He said, no, you guys have been alive for 20 years. I'm going to run as a Republican. And they never really saw eye to eye. But this topic, interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was just the way I like to think about it is it's just the way people were led to think. It's not to condemn them. It was just in the air. In the same way when I had kids and my brothers had kids, it was in the air that this is the thing to do. So a lot of times, this is why you go to church and you read a lot of scripture. It's also why you read older books. I mean, if you have your kids reading what's been written recently, it's garbage. And there's nothing deeper. They're not drawing from deeper wells. They can't, even older movies can be very helpful because there was a time when people looked at things differently, and it's good to learn from them. But if the present can in fact be a prison, then there's a reason why in critical thinking they want to knock everything down to the past. Because talking about what Satan wants to do is cut us off. He wants to cut off husbands from wives. He also wants to cut off children from their parents. I don't know if you've been seeing this, maybe you've experienced it yourself, but children are being cut off from their parents or their grandparents because their grandparents still hold antiquated views about marriage. They're not on board on the LGBTQ thing. And so a lot of daughters would go off to college, bring back the ideology, they'd be brainwashed. And then what happens next is the fathers were fathers are very susceptible to what their daughters think. I mean, I always joked about it with my kids. If my son asked me for money, Hey, can I have $20 to do this? I'm like, no, no. And if my daughter asks, oh, can I have $20? Sure, here's 60. Because it's like the daughters have a certain way to get away with murder with their dads. And that's okay to a certain extent. But it's amazing how many parents and grandparents lose their faith because they want to keep in a good relationship with their children or grandchildren. And this can be very painful. So because you see it now where young families are cutting off access to grandparents because they don't want the grandparents to be talking about things to their children. Don't talk about that here or the relationship is over. But that's Satan's way, is always to cut us off. And he not only cuts us off with the generations that are alive, he wants to cut us off from past generations so that we don't learn from them. And one of the ways he does it is destroying their reputation. Destroy the reputation of George Washington. Destroy the reputation of Jefferson. So if you don't know the past, though, you don't really ever, again, it's your sense of belonging, your sense of history, and it also gets to gratitude. When you cut off the past, you lose gratitude for all that we have here. It doesn't mean you can't say, hey, they got this wrong. Like I can say things about my father and say, on this one, I think it's a mistake, but it's my father. And there's a lot that he knows that I never learned. I mean, so you can have respect while still saying about history, well, that was not right. But just to cut them off and be critical, and that's what they're taught in Marxism, is that everything went before needs to be done away with. And the things that need to be done away with, again, are family and the church, because they stand on as obstacles to your relationship to the state, because the state is all in all. This is why, again, I don't call them public schools like a lot of people. I try to call them government-run schools just to get the idea. And again, there are a lot of wonderful public school, government school teachers. That's not the point. But when you look at it from the point of view of the enemy, you see what they're doing. So, yeah, Margaret Sanger, she went mainstream, and she was very popular among the Protestants. And she got them to institute birth control in a big way. Now, of course, that's going to affect the sizes of churches. When nobody's having kids, you wonder why there are no kids in Sunday school, because nobody's having kids. Then it's remarkable how it came into the Missouri Synod. This is the short version of it all, though, is that there is a book we talked about before. Well, now I'll go back to a little bit of, because this is tied together, about since Marx was not initially successful in that all that he did. So the pivotal figure, the next figure after Marx, was a man by the name of Antonio Gramsci. And he was looking at the situation of communism, and he says, why aren't we selling more? I thought we'd be successful by now, the revolution were to happen. And it's remarkable because he did all his work in jail. He was in a prison in Italy, and he wrote these prison diaries. Now, it would have been a great service to the world if nobody would have given him a typewriter. It's amazing what you can get done in prison and change the world. And he changed the world. And I didn't know anything really about him until I read, other people are ahead of me, so I'm following in their footsteps. So I one Saturday, I think I was at the study. It could have been in the summer, probably in the summer. Nobody is in the seminary offices. And I decided, Gramsci. And by the way, if you're interested in what Margaret Sanger wrote, it's all right there. You can look up Woman in the New Race. It's frightening. I forget what the other one is. But she wrote these books. And She said the greatest evil in the world is that of large families. Well, the greatest evil in the world is large family. It was amazing what she wrote, how evil she was. The wickedness of well, so with Gramsci, he's looking at like how do you get communism into the system? He recognized communism was all about overthrowing the system. So let's overthrow all the institutions. And it wasn't working. So when he came up with the idea of instead of overthrowing the systems, why don't we take them over from the inside? Let's infiltrate the systems. And he looked at all the influences in our culture. And I don't know how he divided it out, but education is a huge one. You got to take, and we've faced this for a long time. You send your kid off to college, you don't know what you're going to get back. Because the kid, you always thought, well, colleges, they're teaching all these great things. Well, maybe, but they also became centers of indoctrination. And all the kids came back as leftists. And the parents are like, what happened to this kid? So they took over the colleges. And of course, then they've taken over the government or public schools. Because, if you look at the people who are going, there never used to be like an education degree. But the schools of education of the public schools are all indoctrination centers. And a lot of kids,
State of Minnesota has horrible teacher certification requirements that are actually strongly anti-Christian, to the point that the Christian school in Winona said, we are proud to employ or to refuse to employ state certified teachers.
so who's refusing?
Christian school.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds radical, but you got
I think one of the requirements was that if a student identifies as the gender that they're not, that the teachers were required to cater to that privately, to the exclusion of the parents' knowledge.
these stories are, I don't think our church has done a good job of supporting parents.
Wisconsin also.
Yeah, our daughters.
What is she dealing with?
Oh, we don't have enough time.
What's the short version?
Well, she's a special education teacher, and our granddaughter's going to Winona to do the same thing. But anyway, she deals with, she'll be in an IEP meeting. This is one example where the child, fifth grader, during the IEP meeting said, Mom, quit calling me she. I'm a they, them. Well, then Carrie, our daughter says, well, if we go this direction, I gotta go back through her whole history and change her pronouns, which would take forever. And so she went to the superintendent and, or the principal, and they talked about it and they worked through it. If the child wants, whatever the child wants, to get that. She does, as my daughter's a very big Christian and a very strong Christian, and so she tries to work through these issues so they come out on the right edge of things, but has to be careful at the same time. Puts her in a really difficult situation.
Yeah, I feel for her. And yeah, we've got to be there for these folks out there. And I hear so many stories about teachers, but in every profession, where they have to go through the DEI training. So this goes back to, and what do you do? We had a teacher in Indiana. In some ways, we have to be ready to come in mass support of people. So again, you remember Jack Phillips, the baker from Colorado, and he refused to. The two of my great heroes would be Jack Phillips and Barronelle Stutzman. Do you know them? Yeah, Jack Phillips was the baker, and he refused to bake and decorate a cake for those celebrating. Was it gay marriage?
Yeah.
It's wedding.
Yeah, he was just like the nicest guy. I've met him a few times. My brother helped buy him a van. Pretty cool. Yeah, I was at the continuing ed. We've told you that with the pastor with Cheryl with like 11 kids, and he is a gem. He and his wife go and help the bakery, and the kids go there and they volunteer to help there. I mean, it's just wonderful. And we all went there. We wore our collars. I wasn't like this. There were probably 15 of us in our collars, and Jack was overwhelmed. He says, I've seen more clergy or pastors here today than I have in the last 5 years. Now, what it tells you is how little support he got from the church. You know, in that situation, the church should be having morning prayer in the parking lot of that place. I mean, they should be out there. The clubs should, the men's club should always be ordering their cakes from that place. And they should be singing hymns in that parking lot. Solidarity makes a big difference when you actually come together as Christians come together. And if you're just quiet, or if you just say, this is one thing that, just drives me nuts as I'm doing things. I can't tell you how many times I'm doing something and then somebody comes to me like quiet, all hushed. Hey, thanks for writing it down. Like, shut up. Like, I don't want that. And I don't want your prayers to send. I want you to join your voice with mine. I want you to say, I want to write a letter to the editor saying, hey, I think that guy's right. I want you to put yourselves out there. That makes a difference. But if you're quiet. Now, again, as far as these are things that need to be talked about, though, because the same thing with Barronelle Stutzman. She finally came to a stalemate in Washington. She didn't win because Washington was going after her. And she's the one who had the bakery, and she wouldn't bake a cake. She had a gay guy working for her. They were great friends. So talking about, can you have gay friends? Of course you can. And you love them and you're friends. But this guy who was her friend for years said, hey, I'm getting married. And she's like, oh, I want you to bake the cake in celebration of it. And she says, I can't, but I love you. And it all was fine. And then somebody got a hold of him. And then a few days later, he came back with a lawsuit against the person that he knew was a really lovely woman. And she spent years in the courts. One thing interesting about both those people is I had the chance to talk to them, and I was curious, like, how this affected their lives. Not going along. Talk about Rod Dreher, you do not speak the lie. I was kind of wondering, like, what kind of toll would this take on you? And like, when you go to bed, would you be restless about the lawsuits? Like, would you be tossing and turning at night about the pressure of it all? And the pressure is they're trying to take away your business, your livelihood, the thing you love doing. And they're all publicly, they're just calling you just like the Beatitudes. Blessed are you when people revile you, say all sorts of evil against you for my name's sake. For your reward is great in heaven. But I asked both of them at different times, of course, but like, I asked them, how do you sleep at night? And they both said something to the effect of, I sleep like a baby. they slept with peace. It reminds me of the death of Polycarp. And Polycarp, when he's taken to the flames, they said, just renounce the Lord. Or really, the idea is just cross your fingers. It's no big deal. Burn a little incense. It'll be fine. Your life can go on. And Polycarp says, the Lord's been good to me all my life. And I always think, I say to myself, as I turn 60 now, because I'm getting morbid, I guess, but as we get older, we should have all the more courage, though, because it's like the Lord's been good to us all our life. And now we're going to somehow be quiet about him. Why would we be quiet about it? Why wouldn't we speak? Polycarp says, the Lord's been good to me all my life. How could I ever speak against him now? And he went to the flames. And you look at Barronelle Stutzman and Jack Phillips. One of the things, and they're both evangelicals, simple, in the way they're very simple people, but they both had the peace that passes all understanding. Their hearts were, and their souls were at peace with God. They knew it was okay. And, again, you can seek earthly treasures. And if you get to seek earthly treasures, you get earthly treasures, and that's it. There's no heavenly treasures for you. You can seek the praise of men, and you might get the praise of men, but that's all you'll get. Or you can seek heavenly treasures, and you can seek the Lord's blessing upon you, that the Lord might say to you and to us, well done, good and faithful servant. And they knew that, and they were at peace. And we had a teacher, going back to your thing, we've had a couple ones, but we had a teacher in Indiana, in Brownsburg, John Klug, and he was told to use the false pronouns. And he says, as a Christian, I can't do that. But he came up with what was a compromise. And I have a professor who does the same thing, Professor Fred, who does the same thing in Michigan. So instead of using any pronouns, he just used last names. Well, let's ask Clark. What does Clark think? He never says, what does he think? It's not bad. And the principal and the leaders of the school said to Klug, he said, but okay, that seems reasonable. That word got out, and they reversed their position. Say, no, you got to use the pronouns. And of course, now there are two things about it. Of course, he lost his job, but that didn't disturb me as much as how little support he got. Like at the Indiana Family Institute, we were like getting his name out. But I talked to a lot of legislators and leaders in Indiana. If you're in the pro-life movement, you get a chance to meet elected officials and they get to know you. But I talked to a lot of people. I said, well, what are you going to do about, this John Klug guy? And nobody had a clue who he was. And like he was everywhere in places like, I don't know, the Federalist or Religious Liberty Media or whatever it was, but they were totally clueless about who he was. And I can't remember any of like my pro-life friends ever speaking up for him. And that was, now I do think we're getting better. I do think, certainly in a lot of states, people have learned to raise their voices. And people like Riley Gaines have helped change the world. Yeah.
I'm not sure how to really word this, so forgive me if I come across kind of angry. But I feel like I've been LCMS my whole life. And I feel like that we live in a bubble. In other words, we go to church on Sunday, we have our four walls, but as members, we don't feel like we have the right, I don't know if that's the right word, or the position to go outside those walls and do things, whether it be politics, whether it be a prayer walk even for evermore. I mean, we belonged to a church in Iowa, and we got outside. We had kids from the parents from the school across the street use our parking lot. Every Wednesday, we went out and gave the moms and dads cookies that came to pick up their kids and said, "Thank you for picking up your children."
Was that LCMS?
Yes. Then we did another prayer walk, and we found through that prayer walk we found an apartment complex that was income qualified. A lot of drug busts in this place, and we ended up going there once a month, taking a meal. We never had our name on any. They didn't know where we were from, but we went every. I think we went twice a month, and we took food there. We ended up baptizing and a baby. We ended up pastor married a couple, and there were things happening there. But that wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have gotten outside the building.
Absolutely.
And it's really, really hard to get the church outside the stupid walls.
I totally agree with you, and I get angry too.
What is a seminary? Where's this coming from?
There is a divide here, and this is where love of the gospel can be used in order to silence Christians. Because what they'll say is, when you come to the church, you preach the gospel, and you don't talk about these social issues. And this was an amazing thing. I wrote about this in the abortion paper, but there was an article in 1966 that was pressing. There's a story there too, because I bought a Reader's Digest in May of 1966. And the only reason I bought it is that's the month I was born. I was at a garage sale, and I was like, I didn't want to be at the garage sale. My wife was there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, get me out of here. Never go shopping with your wife, and never say, hey, we'll go together. I just want to pick up one thing. Your day is shot. So, but we were at this sale, and I'm just like biding my time. They have all these old Reader's Digests. And May 1966, I said, I bought it. I never read it. I just put it on my bookshelf. And then I had to write a paper on abortion. And I was like, what am I going to say? Abortion's wrong. And then I opened up the Reader's Digest. It was a gift from God, because there was an article by Lawrence Slater, who was one of the founders of the abortion movement. Lawrence Slater was a lover and student of Margaret Sanger. Everything that Lawrence Slater said about abortion, he learned from every argument that Margaret Sanger made for Planned Parenthood and birth control. Lawrence Slater simply took those over and pushed abortion. That was 1966. And in the same time, in the same Reader's Digest, shows you how subversive things are. The Reader's Digest was pushing abortion in 66. And I loved Reader's Digest as a kid. I thought it was like mom and pop, Norman Rockwell sort of thing. It wasn't. They were pushing abortion. And in the same issue, there were two other articles. One was, how can we make our children smarter? It's like, that's eugenics. And that affected people. Like, one of the desires to have fewer children is we can really concentrate on a few and they'll be great. So I think we went through that. I don't know if we're in that era now, but they were all giving their kids violin lessons and, culturally enrichment and Mozart in the womb. Like, they thought they were going to have these perfect kids. And if they had fewer, they could really concentrate on them. The other article was by a man named Pew. I think he went to Pew Research. But he was talking to conservative churches. And he said, as conservative churches, we believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God. And yeah, that's true. He believes the inerrant word of God. He says, therefore, don't be diverted into social issues. that are going to take you off your task. Today, they'll often say, stay in your lane. And the idea was, since you have the inerrant word of God, preach the gospel and don't go off into these other issues. Well, it was obviously a way to immobilize Christians who cared into not entering the fray. And so if you don't enter the fray as a Christian, who's going to enter? The people who want to destroy your children or society or the nation. So we're not going to enter in when we actually have some wisdom. But that kind of thinking was meant to silence us. And I told you maybe yesterday, I don't remember, but I had pastors. I can't remember growing up a sermon on abortion, except maybe like it was just on a list of things. Oh, that's a sin. But why? So we were never taught it, but the pastors were like, well, I don't want to disturb the people. It's a social issue. Some have had it. I don't want to talk about it. But also they hid behind the idea, but we'll preach the gospel. And that's a lie. Because you can't preach the gospel that you are forgiven of your sins if you don't know what the sins are. You can't say, deliver us from evil, if you don't know what the evil is and you're allowing your people to live in that evil and to embrace that evil. That's the path of destruction. So there's always been an element of quietism. Now that quietism in the Missouri Synod, part of the historic roots are the fact that since it's a German church, talking about the American flag, there's a history there that we wanted to show as Germans that we were strong Americans, which is good, you know? But also, we were very much enamored with authority. So what the authority says, then we follow. So when you look at the first CTCR document, that's the Commission of Theological on Abortion, it's so unhelpful. Because at the end, it says, what does the AMA, the American Medical Association, say? Well, if you have an abortion, make sure you have a trusted physician. Experts. And it didn't say the experts are wrong. That's what they say. There was no critique of it. And then they had the lawyers. What would the lawyers group be? The big one? What?
American Bar Association.
I guess it was American Bar Association. What do they say? And it was the same sort of thing, like, well, abortion is legal and according to the law. And the CTCR document did not at all critique those positions. It just said, well, but we as Christians will act according to our Christian beliefs. Yeah.
In pietism, I'm glad you brought that up. President Harrison made reference to it during his time in office too, especially in the early years. And then he went to testify, as I recall,
Oh, yeah.
in 2012 or thereabouts. But it seems like there's one, maybe the word is interregnum on this kind of thing, with President Theodore Roosevelt, who was very pro-marriage and very pro. And speaking at like a 1905 mothers gathering, and you're nodding your head, so it sounds like you're familiar. Do you have anything to share about what was Margaret Sanger's reaction to this Dutch reformed man who for 7.5 years was our president, talked about the rigorous life and how you should be married, you should raise up offspring? Did she have anything to say and push back against him? Because even the Lutheran Witness, like you said, our synod as the 20th century went on, accommodated this stuff, or said nothing about it, including with Alfred Rehwinkel, just allowed for it. But in 1905, quoting in the Lutheran Witness, quoting from President TR, it said that Margaret Sanger was a she-devil. It's amazing. So there was a little pushback on the Missouri Synod part.
Yeah, no, there was then. And the other part is you can read Walter A. Meyer Sr. And I've grown, as you grow older, because I think when I was at the seminary, when I thought of Meyer, I thought of him too much as just being an evangelical preacher. So I probably was like less charitable towards him than I should have been. I think it was immature in my thinking. because now he presented himself what today we would say is a Protestant. He looked like you. He had the suit on and the
All
tie.
you're doing is giving him a good circuit brother to stay very good.
Yeah, I mean, he always looked good in the suit and tie.
Yeah.
And like when he preached, I mean, the evangelical preachers of the day, Billy Sunday, they learned from him actually. But he was really an enormous figure, and I mean, a great man. So I just feel like, yeah. And I looked at that book, For Better or Not Worse, and he goes after Margaret Sanger, and he calls her the worst things.
Yes, that's in the 1930s.
Yeah. Now the sad part is, I think he might have changed too, because I think his voice was silent. And again, it's not like against him. I just think that the church drifted, and you start getting used to other things.
It was in the air.
It was in the air. That's why I say, like, whenever I look at the mistakes of the past, it's never to indict them, because we're all fallen human beings, and we're all influenced by the way the world thinks. Like, we don't even think about it. We just assume it's the water that we swim in, it's the air that we breathe. And you're like, and so if anybody does anything that's different, like, that's weird. But what's weird might actually be the thing that's normal. Maybe we're the weird ones that have gone off. So yeah, like the person who writes again is Anthony Eslin about this. There was a period in the late 19th century, and then TR would be part of this, that we could actually learn from, because there was a whole progressive movement back then, that there were things that were problematic. But part of the progressive movement at that time was they still recognized certain things that you say, TR loved nature.
Yes.
There were things in nature that he saw. So he was very much for vigorous manhood. He supported football because he thought football, and it was very controversial, because football was dangerous. I mean, back in the day, especially the helmets, it still is dangerous. I don't know if I were a mom, I would want my kid to be playing football with concussions and all that. I could see no. But on the other hand, he saw something in the vigor of football that's very good if you want to have soldiers who are fighting. And if you want to have men who are the leaders of their household, you need a vigorous manhood. Maybe there's another way to do it, but he was on to something. So you could actually look at the progressives of the late 1800s, and they have a lot of wisdom in them, because they weren't fully indoctrinated, and they were still drawing on things and natural law of things that they saw. The same way, it's like, it's, when I was at the seminary, like back in those days when I was younger, we used to make fun of who are the people that, the prohibitionists. Like, they're taking away all alcohol. Like, look at those people, those Methodists, the temperance movement. And of course, right, there is something very strange about the idea that, Germans come over here and all of a sudden we can't brew beer. I mean, there's something very odd about that movement. But, when you put yourself in the historical position, if you looked at the 1800s, there weren't breweries. There were a lot of, if you're living in a situation maybe out west where you don't have a brewery, you just have hard liquor. So you had all these people who used to be drinking beer are now drinking hard liquor, and they're all in the streets, and they're all becoming useless. And if you're a wife or a mother, you're like, oh my gosh, this is getting terrible. And like you see an example of that, for instance, in the Lutheran church in Siberia. None of the pastors there drink, and they don't have any, like, Redeemer can have 2 kegs. It's okay. But you got to watch it, right? Mm-hmm. But if you go to the church in Siberia, a very strong Lutheran church, they never have drinking at their congregation. And if you go over there, they might give you something to drink, but it'll be when you're together with them, not with just all the people. Well, why is that? Because they have a huge problem with drinking. There's not a woman cannot find a man there because the men are just all drunk and on the streets. It's a problem. Same thing as if you were to be a missionary or a pastor in the Indian reservation. You can say we have the freedom to drink, but yikes, it's the worst thing in the world. It's destroyed their culture, their civilization, because they're all drunks. So it just depends on the situation. And yeah, you can learn about things by getting into the history. There's, it's not just black and white. If you look at the prohibitionists, they had a point. And the funny part is how natural law works in that way. Because I find it remarkable how, for instance, things rise and fall. But I find that a lot of kids don't in any way drink in the same way that we did when we were in college. When we were in college, it was just drinking. I mean, that was just the social life, like Animal House. It was true. And watching my kids go to college, they're like, that's stupid. And it's not because they're, acting like special Christians. None of them were. Because they got over it. Like, it's just too much. In the same way, again, watch Mad Men. It was a great show. And people liked it. But if you look at Mad Men, the businessmen, when you went into one of everybody who was a big salesman, in every office, there was a bar. And again, drinking's fine, but every time you came into the office, they're pouring you a drink. And this was at 11 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. Now, they used to have the 2 martini, was it the 2 martini lunch? Yeah. Well, you don't have to be a Christian to know that's probably not the most productive way to spend your day. That if you do have 2 martinis at lunch, you're going to be a little sluggish for the rest of the day. So that's not Christian. That's simply natural law. So things have a way of, it is funny how sometimes the pagans will get onto things before we do. Yeah.
Yeah, if I remember history correctly, Franklin Roosevelt, cousin of T.R., of course, ran on a platform in 1932 saying, we'll repeal prohibition. And so once it was repealed in the 1930s, it took until the 1970s for the level of consumption to get to where it was even with what it had been prior to prohibition. Therefore, some have said, and argued for a very salutary effect, even though it was unworkable trying to enforce that.
It is so interesting because, of course, then prohibition made beer terrible because people didn't know what beer was supposed to taste like. So Budweiser made it all with rice. Like beer, it wasn't until the microbrew revolution that actually now it's just all IPA. But and I like to listen to, and I found them like for a while. I was listening to books on tape, actual tape, and I was listening to commercials from what year did Prohibition end?
35.
So I was listening to like The Shadow, all the old radio shows. And what was great about it, and I loved listening to the shows, and so they're very gripping, but they kept the commercials in them. Yeah. And the commercials were fascinating. So they're like commercials for wine. Yeah. And they're obviously trying to get people to drink wine again because they hadn't drunk wine for years. And the commercials are like, so what's for dinner tonight? That same old spaghetti. I'm tired of spaghetti. But what makes the spaghetti better? A glass of rosé wine. And they went through all these meals. It'll taste better with a glass of wine. So they were obviously trying to get wine. It's the same thing happened with wine. We had just terrible wine for years after Prohibition because people didn't know what it was going to taste like. So it took a while to go from Kool-Aid back to wine. I had those people in my congregation who were still living in that era because they'd invite me over to the house. And not many of them were drinkers. But one guy says, Pastor, would you like a glass of wine? I'm like, okay. and he gets a glass. He gets the wine out, pours a glass, and then opens the sugar bowl. And he mixes it around. And you want it to be a little sweeter. I'm like, oh. Well, there's a guy who was still living in the Prohibition era, and they weren't used to. It's like a kid drinking wine. Oh, what is that? Well, they didn't know what it was supposed to taste like. But again, but looking at history is always instructive, because even things that you don't agree with or you think now, you got to put yourself in that situation and say they weren't stupid. Like, you can't look at an era and say, oh, those prohibitionists were stupid. No, they weren't. They were dealing with a problem where they had a bunch of beer drinkers who now all of a sudden have hard liquor and are pouring. It's like you pour up your pint of beer, and now let's pour the same glass with hard liquor. And that's a problem, right? So they weren't used to it. So anyway, I don't know where that goes. But if you look at the Margaret Sanger's revolution, she brought it to the Protestants, and the Protestants ate it up. And part of it was because it was they thought they were being anti-Catholic, which was they thought was a good thing. And also there was a financial incentive. Fewer children was equated with upward mobility. And then that did come into the Missouri Synod. I was just amazed by this book, Planned Parenthood. And it was written by a Concordia St. Louis professors who was actually very conservative, Ray Winkle. And Ray Winkle was a seminary professor at St. Louis. He used to always be quoted in Christian News, which is a very conservative newspaper. And he was like a hero for the historicity of the Bible. So he wrote about Jonah and the fish, that Jonah was actually in the fish for whatever, the belly of the fish. He wrote that Noah's Ark actually did happen. It's not just a story. The world was created in 7 days. So he was very big on the history of the Bible being true. In the same way, he also published a book called Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood was a picture, you would call it soft eugenics, of a very good-looking husband and a very good-looking wife and a really cute daughter, and that was it.
Looked very 1959.
Yeah, but like that's the perfect family there. And he talked about, it was so interesting because he wrote that about the same time that John Paul II is doing his theology of the body. And like he said that, I mean, some ways, I don't know whether he was naive or whether he was lying. He definitely was influenced by his wife, who was a physician. But he would say, for instance, in Planned Parenthood, there's always going to be a place for normal sized families. And by normal, he meant 8 kids. There'll always be a place for within the Planned Parenthood understanding for large families. Well, Margaret Sanger wrote books in which the titles of her chapters, it wasn't like in a footnote. The title of her chapter is The Wickedness of the Large Family. So again, I don't know. Like, I always wonder with people who knew him, like, what was the story there? Did he really not know what he was talking about, or was he just willfully not knowing? I don't know the answer to that. And he talked about birth control, saying some of it is very ominous, because he says, he compares birth control to putting a dam like you have on the river. So you can put a dam on a river and it can make things better for crops and all that. And he says, man can change nature. He didn't say operate within nature. Man can change nature because he is the master of it. Well, you can't change nature. Nature's always going to be there. You can work within nature, but you can't change nature. So that's the lie. A woman can be told that she can become like a man. So Margaret Sanger taught women that they could become like men. So part of the lie was, a guy can sleep around. Why can't a woman sleep around? The problem is women do look at sex differently. When they have sex, there's a deep attachment. And they do really expect you. Like, remember the 60s songs, Will You Love Me Tomorrow? Will you love me? That was a real thing. And they were told as women, hey, it's just coitus, it's just sex. Don't worry about it. You can just have sex and say, or like Pretty Woman. I don't know if you remember that movie with Julia Roberts. She was like a prostitute, and she says, I'll have sex, but I'm saving the kissing for a marriage. It's like, doesn't work that way, because then it left women distraught, lonely, felt like they were being used, which they were. It left them suicidal. So it was a lie, because you just can't change nature. Now it is talking about entering into the, public, but you're angry entering in the public square. I do think, or outside, it would be what I would like to see are church services outside. Not all the time, but I don't even mean like in your parking lot would be all right. We could do it, be in the neighborhood. But that like courthouses, there are public areas that belong to all of us, and you could use them. All you got to do is get the permit. Like we used to have services, driving movie theaters. That was kind of silly. What else? Like, but out in nature. Well, if you're out in nature already, it's fine. But I mean actually being someplace in public where people are going by. Have a church service there.
Neighborhood city park.
What's that?
A neighborhood city park.
Yeah.
Have BDS there too.
Yeah. Now that'd be great. And the other thing about that is so it's not just in protest. I do think every church should be involved in 40 Days for Life or something like that. Life Chain, marches. Everybody should do that.
Life Day yesterday came in the mail. This is Lutheran for Life, and they stand firm for life, and many good articles there in terms of clarifying and working with these younger people too.
It's great to do it together. Get a group, make it an outing. Don't just go by yourself, but get your friends to go. And as far as the public nature, as you mentioned, it's so necessary, not just in protest or in prayer, but because the world has not heard what we have to say. I mean, that's amazing how a small group like this sings so well on My Heart and Print Thine Image. It's like you all sing, and you take it for granted. But the world has never heard that song. If you go out there, it's foreign to them. And not only is the hymn foreign to them, the beauty of it is foreign to them. And I was doing a wedding in which there was a Christian bride, and there were like 4 pagan bridesmaids, heathen bridesmaids. And you could tell they came into the church, but they didn't know where they were. They were, the chewing gum, laughing, whatever. And I would say, hey, take that outside. This is the sanctuary. We don't act like that here. And they took that well. And then, but I'm engaging with them, obviously. Then once they go out, I go out with them, And then I'm saying, okay, at this part of the service, we're going to sing a song, a hymn. And you don't have your hymnal up there, but I gave them sheets. At this part, we sing this. And I didn't say, if you would like to sing it, I said, this is what we do now. And I was amazed because they all did it. Like, these are people who've never sung a hymn in their life, and they were all singing. And then afterwards, I couldn't believe it, because these were people who did not like the church, whatever it is. But afterwards, they're like, this was the most beautiful ceremony I've ever seen. Like, they didn't know, but they knew, because they never had experienced it. So a lot of the world out there has never heard it. And all of a sudden, you hear it, and it's like, it would be as if the heavens would open up, and you would hear the angel choirs, and you're like, there's something else that I'm missing in this world. But how would they know if they never hear it? So that's why I like the public place, the park or something like that. Because again, in the 40 days for life, I used to, at the beginning, sometimes I would go by myself. I'd sign up for 2 hours. That was a drag. and so, like, what do you do in the 2 hours? 2 hours is a long time. And I would say, okay, I'll bring my Bible. And I would like read things I didn't know much about. I'll read a Minor Prophet. I'll read Chronicles. And it's like, oh really? What is that? So you read stuff and like, that's interesting. So that helped. But then the seminary students started to do it, and they're intense, man. So we would get evening prayer and we'd get vespers, and they would sing hymns, and they always chose the hardest hymns. Because they're seminary students, they wanted to sing the really good ones. And it was great. And that also transformed our local march, because our local March for Life was always a silent march. Nobody ever said a word. You just marched in silence, in kind of reverence for the dead, sort of thing, and the gravity of the situation. And then students were like, well, why don't we sing? And I'm like, that's a good idea. So we started making little hymnals or little pamphlets, whatever it is, and we'd have like 8 hymns. And we started singing. I mean, that changed the whole march. Now at the end, my favorite part is I gather up all the Lutherans together. And so we have a little hymn sing, like 3 hymns maybe, they've already marched. And we have some prayers. So for any local pastors who are there, I try to get them, I volunteer them to say a word and to, but it all started because the Catholics were doing it in a smaller group. And they were all praying the Lord's Prayer. And they end, how do they end? Deliver us from evil. Yeah, they end deliver us from evil. So I'm on the other side of the street, some Lutherans. So I'm like, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. Why? But that got me thinking too. So, and we always end with a mighty fortress. And it's just like, and then we got a synodical hymn board. It was so funny. We had the seminarians hymn board, hymn sheet, and the synodical one. And like, oh no, they're different. What are we going to do? Well, let's find out all the hymns that are the same on both. And like, there were none that were the same. Because the seminarians were all like gung-ho, and the synodical ones were all like ye old favorites. And there's room for both. And then on the seminary, on the synodical one, they had a mighty fortress, but they had the lame translation. And I said, can we sing the real mighty fortress? And of course, we didn't have the words for it. And I go, yeah, can we sing it without the words? They go, oh yes. And everybody sang it without the words. They knew it. It was quite great. So we had 250, 300 Lutherans in front of the federal building singing a mighty fortress. That makes a difference. Because people take notice. They're like, what is this? So yeah, if you believe the word works, the word of God works, then you'll invite people to church, but then you'll also take it outside to places where people are with the recognition, like these girls who came into this wedding service have never heard it. Imagine that your only view of the church was what you knew from TV and movies.
Or what you see from the outside. Or what you see from the outside. You just see this building from the outside.
Yeah, they have no clue what's going on in here. But when you actually experience it, it's something different. And it has the beauty that is undeniable. What we're doing in here is just beautiful. And you don't have to be a Christian to catch on. You say, and talking about, there were 2 people who headed the abortion movement, Lawrence Slater and who's the other guy? Bernard Nathanson. And Bernard Nathanson was a guy who oversaw 20,000 abortions. And he even aborted his own kid. And he said, what was it like at the time when you aborted your kid? He said, well, I was kind of proud of it because he knew he was so skillful. Well, he didn't stay that way. He wrote a book in the early 70s about abortion, and he wasn't pro-life, but he was like, and I've got the book from the library. It's like, maybe abortion isn't really the panacea helping people out like we thought. Maybe we should think this over a little bit. But then he was actually converted he became one of these people who was interested in what these pro-lifers were all about. So he would actually go to the abortion clinic, hymn sings and all of that. They weren't silent, they were singing hymns. And he was like going around, he said, I was furiously taking notes about what they were doing. And he was just so interested. And then it dawned on him and said that, why do they have a peace that I don't have? And that this also is part of the lie. Like they want, the world wants, the devil wants the world to think that the anti-abortion movement is Westboro Baptist. Well, that's such a lie. I don't think 10 people in that movement, but they'll always show we're not letting the Christians always like to be proud. We're not like the Westboro Baptist. Oh, shut up. Well, at least they're out there, but that's not who it is. You go to a pro-life rally or a march, they're like the nicest people you'll ever want to meet, and they're full of joy. And when Bernard Nathanson was going to these abortion clinics with the pro-life people singing, he's like, why do they have peace and I don't? Why do they have joy and I don't? And he said, it dawned on me on that time that the man Jesus who died 2,000 years ago on the cross had died for me and for all my sins. And his heart was changed. And he became the father of the pro-life movement, really. And he changed a lot of things because he's the one who put out the videos called The Silent Scream. And that's early in the days of ultrasound. So again, I don't know whether it was like 1980, I'm not sure. What's that? 82, I think. 82. So you can still see those on YouTube, but now it would be, I don't know what the modern version is. But now he's the guy that we said who before, like Gene Staker Garten, who broke the baby. Now we're talking about the baby. And he's showing the baby in the womb. And, he lived his life in dedication to Christ and in defense of the unborn his whole life. So it's an amazing turnaround story. He's like a St. Paul figure. Yeah.
Because of the way Sanger was and eugenics, as you alluded to earlier, is there any recorded way? Maybe I don't want to receive the Margaret Sanger Award considering what she was associated with.
Maybe you would know. I don't know whether that's a thing or not, or whether
People like Hillary Clinton have taken it.
sure.
But
I mean, it does have a way. It's like evil will. We're called to stand with those who confess Christ. That's why, again, the Barronelle Stutzman or Jack Phillips thing, what bothered me most was not their enemies, but it was the silence of their friends. We who should have been praying for them, talking, going there. Like if you see somebody in trouble, we should go by their side right away. That's the least we can do is stand with them, saying, I'm with him. Instead of like, hey, I hope things are going okay. So we're called to suffer with those who suffer for the name of Christ. And, but like with evil, though, people will always find an evil is that you are their friend as long as you're useful to them. The friendship among the devils and the demons is not true friendship or true love. Because once you no longer are useful. You'll be thrown under the bus and forgotten about. So people are always seeking friendship with those who are against the Lord, and they'll find that friendship for a while, but don't think they really care about you. It's the same thing as like you think about a woman who goes to Planned Parenthood. They're very kind to her as she's walking in the door. They don't give a rip about her once she walks out. And if she comes back in a week later, said, I'm having some hard time dealing with it. Joke. You don't care, you don't matter to me anymore. We do have coming up at the seminary. I nominated her, I'm proud to say, and I can't pronounce her name, but Paivi Rosanen.
Finland. Finland?
Finland. Are you a Finn?
No.
Yeah, Finland.
Sweet.
She's a parliamentarian in Finland. And she was once again secretary of whatever.
Interior Department or something.
Yeah. And she they've been going after her for years because of something that was put on the church website about homosexuality. And she's been winning all her cases and they appealed them all. And she lost at their Supreme Court. I mean, it's remarkable. And there's a fine.
Yeah.
But
Should we be raising funds for her and the bishop there, them to pay their fines?
I don't know about that. Because in one sense, I think it's only a couple $1,000s, I think.
It's small. It's a token amount.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my guess, I'll see what again. But yeah, the bishop, who's not her bishop, it's a little confusing to me. The bishop who got in trouble is the bishop of the confessional version of the church.
Yeah.
She's still a member of the state church.
She is still.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, you've got to be wise if you're in that position, you have a chance to influence. That's where church kind of relations are a little foggy. Like you've got to say, what's the best thing to do? And I think she's chosen a way that actually is discerning. But she's obviously friends with the confessionals.
Yes.
And the confessional bishop is also the one who was fined along with her.
Yeah.
And so was his church. So was the publishing house.
Yeah.
And then they were also ordered to pull the publication. And what a lot of people don't realize is the law under which she was convicted was passed 8 years after the publication of the document. This is a retroactive application of the law. The pamphlet was published in 2004. The law was passed in 2012. And so they're actually being prosecuted for something that was done prior to the passing of the law.
Retroactive law.
I mean, I just can't imagine how exhausting this must be emotionally, taxing it is. That she seems to have, whenever she talks, she's talking with joy. Like she's not, we should be angrier and they're joyful and we should be angry. Because I'm amazed how they do it. Like she seems she's right away. She's just smiling. And she is more like Peter, who goes to jail in Acts. And then he leaves rejoicing that he's been counted worthy to suffer for the name of Christ. It's for them to be joyful. It's not for us. I've heard a lot of Christians say, oh, well, suffering can be good. Well, you can't say suffering. You can say suffering is good for you. You can't say it's good for someone else. When someone else is suffering for Christ, then you got to get worked up. So, yeah, she's going to be given an honorary doctorate at our graduation in May. And then the next day, she's going to give a public. I don't know how that's going to all work.
It's going to be outside of course.
I think the seminary is a difficult place there because it's beautiful, but we got a difficult. It'd be better if you've been to California University. Oh my gosh, Concordia Irvine. Have you been out there? They have an amphitheater that's like a Greco-Roman amphitheater built into stone and all that. And the weather there is perfect every day of the year. So they can have outdoor theater, Shakespeare, music. I mean, all outside. The acoustics are incredible.
Well, someday you can have a stand by the Luther statue and say, "Here to stand."
We have a difficulty, the seminary, because the best meeting place is the chapel. But they're so concerned about the chapel then also being a public space. So, for instance, we gave a doctorate to Molly Ziegler Hemingway, whose book just came out yesterday on Justice Alito.
Yeah.
We gave her an honorary degree, and for our commencement speaker, we had an old Lutheran pastor. And these pastors don't have no matter how long you do it, they don't know the difference between a commencement speech and a sermon. So they're always giving us a sermon instead of a little lighthearted, and now you're going out. You always get these sermons. But we were afraid, I think, to have Molly Ziegler Hemingway give the commencement. I'm not part of that decision-making process. Because then you're going to say, look, a woman is up there speaking. But they transformed the chapel that day into a commencement. So they put up all the flags of the nation. The altar is masked. All that stuff. There's a prayer. There's like one hymn, but it's supposed to not be a church for that ceremony. It's a commencement.
Pyramids are around the fall, but elections are false.
That's correct. And I don't think maybe you see the lectern, but it's stripped down. Yeah. But nevertheless, it's still going to cause Christian News to say, a woman was there speaking at the chapel. Like, no, it wasn't. It was a commencement. So it's very difficult. So really, Pi V. Rosamond should be the one giving the commencement speech. But somehow we can't pull that off. Maybe because we don't have the space. I don't know. Because we don't have other venues. If you come up, then if we have it at the auditorium, our auditorium was built at a time when everybody was smaller.
Yeah.
The seats are crammed in. It's not a comfortable.
It was a senior college for 19, 20-year-olds.
Yeah. So we're doing a lot to make it more comfortable, but it's also designed by Saarinen so that all the buildings, you can't change them.
Is there a large park in Fort Wayne to take it out, go to a shelter, and have a gathering or what do you call it?
Now we're just shooting the breeze. I'm not part.
There's a soccer field.
If Russ were here, all of your comments would have meaning. But I'm not Russ, and I'm not on the cabinet or whatever they call the ruling.
But the big tent. There's a church in Winona where they're having prayer and tents and people gather.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
But the big tents are so that there could be public people gathering.
Yeah, I mean that's how they do it in Kansas City.
Invite the Roman Catholic doesn't import.
No, the goal is we're going to invite everybody.
Go ahead.
We're going to invite Catholics, even anybody who wants to, whether it works or not, but we're trying to get everybody to come to that. I mean, it's a crew together. So she is a figure of some import. Anybody else like to throw in their 2 cents? We're winding down here. I don't want to talk more about critical theory or.
Yeah. We should probably be on your way. God's feet as a driving here.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
But if there's anything else on your mind,
I was just curious. You said it was a beautiful service before Megan said, was your vestment pressed for the occasion?
I don't know what I look like. I don't think I was beautiful. I think the music was beautiful.
You're handsome. My mother would tell me, she'd come in the bed for my brother, and she'd say, "You are a handsome young man."
Well, that's
beauty. You said the beauty of brides, handsome men.
Yeah, but I'm old enough that I used to use that word of women.
Oh no,
that's true. Yeah. Does anybody remember saying she's a handsome woman? Yeah. Like you would say, McCall. Lauren McCall
Yes, with the hands.
was a handsome woman. She was. She was a good looking woman. So that word just came off. I forget.
Well,
Maybe
then I got.
who's the silent films with Greta Garbo.
I lived
Yeah.
long in Columbia.
But now you can't say it anymore, I don't think.
There.
All right, I guess that's probably enough. So